Have you ever spent time with someone you genuinely care about, and still walked away feeling completely drained? Not because of a fight. Not because something went wrong. But because something in you feels tired. You replay the conversation later and nothing seems obvious. You laughed. You listened. You were present. Maybe you were even kind, supportive, patient. And yet, when it's over, there's this quiet heaviness in your body. You feel mentally exhausted. Emotionally stretched. Like something in you was working the entire time, and never really stopped. Sometimes it shows up as silence on the way home. Sometimes as a need to be alone. Sometimes as that subtle thought, why do I feel like this? And what makes it even more confusing is that this doesn't happen with everyone. With some people, you feel light. Natural. At ease. But with others, even people you love, your energy seems to disappear slowly, almost invisibly. You might start wondering if something is wrong with you. Am I too sensitive? Am I overthinking? Why can't I just relax? So next time, you try harder. You show up more present. More attentive. More careful. You listen more closely. You choose your words more gently. You make sure you don't say the wrong thing. And without realizing it, something inside you stays alert the entire time. Tracking tone. Reading expressions. Adjusting responses. Making sure everything feels okay. And maybe that's the question that quietly sits underneath all of this. Why does being around certain people feel like something you have to manage, instead of something you can simply experience? If you look closely at these moments, the exhaustion doesn't usually come from what is said. It comes from everything happening underneath what is said. On the surface, the interaction might seem completely normal. You meet for coffee, you sit across from each other, you talk about work, family, small frustrations, daily life. There's no visible conflict. No argument. No obvious tension that anyone else would point to. But inside your body, something else is happening. You are not just listening. You are reading. You notice the slight change in their tone when they talk about something sensitive. You catch the pause before they respond. You feel the weight behind certain words, even when they sound casual. You pick up on what is not being said as much as what is. And without consciously deciding to, you begin adjusting. You soften your voice when they seem tired. You become more careful when they seem irritated. You choose your words more slowly when the conversation feels fragile. You might avoid certain topics entirely. You might redirect the conversation when it starts to feel heavy. You might laugh a little more than you actually feel like laughing, just to keep things light. All of this happens quietly. Almost invisibly. From the outside, you look present. Engaged. Easy to be with. But internally, there is a constant movement. A subtle calibration. A kind of emotional balancing act where part of you is always asking. Is everything okay right now? Did that land well? Should I say something different? Is there tension I need to smooth out? And because this process is so familiar, it doesn't feel like effort in the moment. It just feels like being with someone. Until it ends. And that's when the exhaustion appears. Because your nervous system has been active the entire time. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that looks stressful from the outside. But in a sustained, low-level way that never fully turns off. It's like holding a weight that is light enough to carry, but heavy enough to wear you down over time. This is why the fatigue often feels confusing. You weren't arguing. You weren't solving a problem. You weren't doing anything physically demanding. And yet, your body reacts as if you just finished something intense. You might feel the need to sit in silence. To be alone. To not talk to anyone for a while. Sometimes you don't even want to think. Because what you're actually recovering from is not the conversation itself, it's the continuous internal adjustment that happened during it. This becomes even more noticeable when you compare different interactions. There are people you can be around who don't drain you at all. With them, conversations feel effortless. You don't rehearse your words before speaking. You don't analyze their reactions in real time. You don't feel the need to manage the emotional atmosphere. You can pause without feeling pressure. You can disagree without feeling tension spike inside you. You can be quiet without wondering if something is wrong. And when you leave, you don't feel depleted. Sometimes you even feel more energized than before. The contrast is important. Because it shows that the exhaustion is not about social interaction itself. It's about what your nervous system believes is required during that interaction. With some people, your body feels safe enough to stop monitoring. With others, it doesn't. And when your nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to relax, it shifts into a subtle state of alertness. Not panic. Not anxiety in the obvious sense. But a quiet readiness. A readiness to adjust. To respond. To prevent discomfort. This is where the drain begins. Because instead of simply experiencing the interaction, you are also managing it. You are holding awareness not just of yourself, but of the other person's emotional state at the same time. And that dual awareness requires energy. A lot of it. Especially when it lasts for an entire conversation, an entire dinner, an entire visit. This is why you might notice something else. The exhaustion is often stronger with people you care about. Which can feel confusing. Because shouldn't it be easier with people you love? But caring about someone can increase how much attention your nervous system gives to their emotional state. You become more invested in how they feel. More sensitive to their reactions. More careful not to upset them. And without realizing it, you might start taking on a quiet role. The one who keeps things smooth. The one who listens carefully. The one who doesn't add extra stress. The one who makes sure everything feels okay. And while that role can feel natural, even meaningful, it also comes with a cost. Because every time you adjust yourself to maintain that emotional balance, you are using energy that doesn't fully return to you during the interaction. It's being spent outward. And when the interaction ends, that's when your body finally notices. That something has been running in the background the entire time. That something has been active, attentive, slightly tense, slightly careful. And that something is tired. Which leads to a deeper question that most people don't immediately ask. If being around certain people feels draining, is it because of who they are, or because of what your nervous system believes it needs to do when you're with them? If we move a little deeper into this pattern, the question is no longer just why does this happen now, but when did your body learn that being with someone requires this level of attention? Because what feels like personality in adulthood is often something your nervous system practiced long before you knew you were practicing anything at all. As a child, you didn't sit down and decide to become observant, careful, or emotionally attentive. You didn't choose to read the room. You didn't consciously learn to track tone, mood, or subtle shifts in energy. Your body learned it. And it learned it in environments where paying attention wasn't just helpful, it was important. For some children, emotional signals are simple. A parent is upset, but the upset is clear, contained, and separate from the child. The child can recognize, this belongs to them. The emotional boundary is visible, even if not explained in words. But in other environments, the emotional landscape is less defined. Moods shift without clear explanation. Tension appears without warning. Silence carries weight. Reactions feel unpredictable. And for a child, unpredictability is not neutral. It creates a quiet question in the body. What just changed? And more importantly, do I need to do something about it? This is where a pattern begins to form. The child starts scanning. Not in a dramatic way. Not with fear as we usually imagine it. But with attention. They notice the difference between a relaxed tone and a sharp one. They notice how quickly someone responds, or doesn't. They notice the emotional temperature of the room before they even understand what emotions are. And because children are wired for connection, that attention quickly becomes adjustment. If the room feels tense, they become quieter. If someone seems stressed, they become easier. If something feels fragile, they become more careful. Not because they are told to, but because it works. It reduces tension. It restores calm. It keeps connection intact. And when something works, the nervous system remembers. This is how emotional attunement slowly shifts into emotional responsibility. The child begins to feel that their presence has an effect on the emotional environment, and that effect matters. If they say something wrong, tension might increase. If they act in a certain way, someone might withdraw. If they are too loud, too emotional, too demanding, something might shift. So they begin shaping themselves in response. Not all at once. Not consciously. But gradually. They learn which version of themselves keeps things smooth. And that version becomes familiar. Maybe it's the version that listens more than speaks. Maybe it's the version that avoids conflict. Maybe it's the version that senses what others need before it's said. Maybe it's the version that doesn't add extra weight to the room. And while this adaptation is intelligent, it carries something with it. The body never fully relaxes. Because if emotional safety depends on reading and adjusting, then attention must stay active. Even in calm moments. Even in safe moments. Even when nothing is obviously wrong. This is where something subtle but powerful develops: baseline vigilance. Not anxiety in the obvious sense. But a quiet readiness. A readiness to notice. A readiness to respond. A readiness to shift. This baseline doesn't turn off automatically when you grow up. It simply follows you into adult relationships. So when you sit across from someone today, at dinner, at work, on a couch, your body is not entering that moment empty. It's bringing a history of learned attention. It's asking questions before you even speak. What is their mood? What is the tone here? Is everything okay? Do I need to adjust? And because this process is so fast, it doesn't feel like effort. It feels like intuition. Like sensitivity. Like awareness. Like emotional intelligence. And in many ways, it is. But when that awareness is paired with responsibility, something changes. Instead of just noticing emotions, you begin managing your response to keep those emotions stable. This is where the energy drain begins to form. Because now you are not only present in the interaction, you are also regulating it. You are holding two layers of awareness at once. Your own experience. And the other person's emotional state. And when those two layers don't align, when you feel something but adjust it to maintain harmony, that creates internal friction. You might feel tired, but stay engaged. You might feel uncomfortable, but keep smiling. You might feel like pulling back, but stay present. Each of these small adjustments costs energy. Individually, they seem insignificant. But over time, they accumulate. This is why the exhaustion doesn't feel immediate. It builds quietly. Moment by moment. Adjustment by adjustment. Until the interaction ends, and your body finally releases the effort it was holding. And that release often comes with a kind of drop. A drop in energy. A drop in motivation. A drop in emotional availability. Sometimes even a need to withdraw completely for a while. Not because the interaction was bad. But because it required more from your nervous system than it looked like on the surface. There is another layer here that makes this even more complex. The people who drain you are not always difficult in obvious ways. They may not be loud, aggressive, or demanding. In fact, sometimes they are subtle. They might be slightly distant. Slightly unpredictable. Slightly hard to read. And that, slight, is enough. Because your nervous system is not responding only to what is visible, it is responding to what feels uncertain. And uncertainty activates attention. If someone is clear, consistent, and emotionally steady, your body relaxes. If someone is ambiguous, inconsistent, or hard to read, your body leans in. It tries to understand. It tries to predict. It tries to stay ahead of possible shifts. And that leaning in is effort. Which is why you might notice something surprising. Sometimes the people who drain you are not the ones who ask the most from you directly. They are the ones your body feels it needs to figure out. Because figuring someone out requires constant engagement. Constant reading. Constant interpretation. Constant adjustment. And that process does not have a clear endpoint. It just continues. This is also why you may find yourself feeling more drained after interactions where nothing happened than after interactions where something was clearly expressed. Clear conflict can actually be less exhausting than unclear emotional space. Because when something is clear, your body knows where it stands. When something is unclear, your body keeps searching. And searching takes energy. So the exhaustion you feel is not random. It is the result of a system that learned, very early, that connection sometimes requires attention, adjustment, and quiet responsibility. And now, in adulthood, that system is still active. Still attentive. Still trying to make sure everything stays okay. Which leads to a deeper, more uncomfortable question. If your body learned to stay slightly around certain emotional patterns, how much of your exhaustion comes not from the people themselves, but from the version of you that shows up with them? When this pattern continues into adulthood, it begins to shape not only how you feel around certain people, but how you show up with them. Because over time, you don't just notice emotional shifts, you begin anticipating them. And anticipation changes everything. Before a conversation even begins, something in you is already preparing. You might think about what you're going to say. You might imagine how the other person will respond. You might adjust your tone in advance, soften certain topics, avoid others entirely. It's subtle. Almost invisible. But it means you're not entering the interaction empty, you're entering it already slightly activated. Already attentive. Already careful. Already working. This is why the drain doesn't start at the end of the interaction. It starts before it even begins. You might notice it in small ways. That slight hesitation before sending a message. That moment of overthinking before walking into a room. That quiet mental rehearsal of what you might say, or what you shouldn't say. And when the interaction actually starts, your body doesn't relax. It stays engaged. It keeps tracking. It keeps adjusting. You notice when they interrupt you. You notice when they don't respond the way you expected. You notice when their tone changes slightly, even if no one else would catch it. And each time you notice, something inside you reacts. Not dramatically. Not in a way that looks like anxiety. But in a way that asks. Do I need to shift? Maybe you speak a little more carefully. Maybe you explain yourself more than necessary. Maybe you soften your opinion. Maybe you laugh something off that didn't actually feel funny. These adjustments are quick. Almost automatic. But they require energy. Because each adjustment means you are not fully aligned with what you're feeling in that moment. You are shaping your response to match what feels safest. And the more this happens, the more the interaction becomes something you are managing rather than simply experiencing. This is where something important begins to happen inside you. A quiet split. One part of you is present in the conversation. The other part is observing it. Watching how it's going. Measuring reactions. Evaluating whether everything feels okay. And holding both of these roles at the same time is tiring. Because it means you are never fully inside the moment. You are always slightly outside of it too. And that distance, even if small, requires effort to maintain. You might notice this especially in conversations that should feel simple. Talking about your day. Sharing something that happened. Expressing a small frustration. But instead of just speaking, you monitor how your words land. You might stop yourself mid-sentence to rephrase. You might add disclaimers. You might check the other person's face for signs of reaction. And if you sense even a slight shift, something that feels off, distant, or unclear, you respond. You adjust your tone. You clarify what you meant. You try to smooth the moment before it becomes something else. And again, none of this looks dramatic from the outside. It just looks like conversation. But internally, it is active. Layered. Continuous. And this is where the exhaustion deepens. Because it is not just about reacting to what is happening. It is about constantly preparing for what might happen. This is especially true with people who feel unpredictable in small ways. Not obviously unstable. But slightly inconsistent. One day warm, another day distant. One moment engaged, another distracted. One conversation easy, another slightly tense. Your nervous system picks up on this variability. And instead of relaxing into the interaction, it stays ready. Ready to adjust if needed. Ready to respond if something shifts. Ready to protect the connection if it starts to feel unstable. And this readiness becomes a kind of background tension. Not strong enough to feel like anxiety, but present enough to keep your body from fully resting. This is why you may feel something else after these interactions. Not just tired, but emptied. As if something in you was being used the entire time. Because in a way, it was. Your attention was being used. Your emotional awareness was being used. Your ability to regulate and adjust was being used. And often, without you receiving the same level of presence in return. This creates an imbalance that is hard to see but easy to feel. You might notice that with certain people. You listen more than you speak. You adapt more than you express. You hold space more than you take space. And while you may not consciously think of it this way, your body registers the difference. It feels the one-sided effort. It feels the constant outward focus. And over time, it begins to associate those interactions with depletion. There is another layer that makes this even more complex. Sometimes, the people who drain you are not asking you to do any of this. They are simply being themselves. And yet, your body responds as if something is required. This is where it becomes less about the other person, and more about the internal pattern. Because the adjustment is happening even when it is not explicitly needed. You might soften your voice even if no one is upset. You might explain yourself even if no one misunderstood. You might hold back even if no one asked you to. The pattern runs on its own. And this is why it can feel confusing. Because part of you might think, they didn't do anything wrong. So why do I feel like this? And the answer is often not in the visible interaction. It is in the invisible role your nervous system is playing during it. A role that says, stay aware. Stay careful. Stay adjusted. Make sure everything stays okay. But here is where something begins to shift. When you start noticing this role, not judging it, not trying to eliminate it, but simply seeing it, you create a small separation. You begin to recognize. This is something I am doing. Not something that is being done to me. And that recognition changes the experience. Because if it is something you are doing, even automatically, then it is also something that can slowly begin to change. Not by forcing yourself to stop. But by becoming aware of the moments where the adjustment begins. That slight pause. That internal question. That urge to shift. Because inside those moments is a quiet possibility that wasn't there before. The possibility of not adjusting immediately. Of letting a moment exist without managing it. Of staying with your own response, even if the other person's emotional state is unclear. And that possibility, even if small, begins to introduce something new into the interaction. Space. Space where you are not constantly shaping yourself. Space where you are not holding both sides of the emotional experience. Space where the interaction is allowed to exist, without you carrying all of it. And the moment that space appears, even briefly, a deeper question begins to emerge. If you didn't have to stay on around certain people, what would it feel like to simply be there, without adjusting at all? If we stay with this question, what is actually happening inside you during these interactions, we begin to see that this isn't only about people. It's about how your nervous system organizes connection. And to understand that, we need to look at something very simple, but very powerful. Your body is constantly asking one question in relationships. Is it safe to relax here? Not safe in a physical sense. Safe to be yourself. Safe to not monitor. Safe to not adjust. Safe to not manage what might happen next. When the answer is yes, your body settles. Your attention softens. You stop scanning. You stop preparing. You simply respond, moment by moment, without needing to control the emotional atmosphere. But when the answer is uncertain, something else happens. Your nervous system doesn't panic, it organizes. It moves into a state we could describe as functional alertness. You are calm enough to interact, but not relaxed enough to stop monitoring. And that difference is everything. Because relaxation restores energy. Monitoring spends it. This is where a concept from psychology helps clarify what you're feeling: co-regulation. In healthy relational spaces, people regulate each other without effort. One person's calm supports the other. One person's presence makes the other feel more grounded. There is a natural back and forth where emotional weight is shared. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to manage it. It just happens. But when co-regulation is uneven, when one person is doing more of the emotional stabilizing, something shifts. Instead of sharing emotional space, you begin carrying more of it. You track their mood. You adjust your tone. You prevent tension before it grows. And even if the other person isn't asking you to do this, your nervous system has learned that it's safer when you do. This creates a dynamic where your body becomes the regulator of the interaction. And regulation requires energy. Especially when it is one-sided. Another piece of this pattern involves what psychologists sometimes call emotional boundaries, but not as a concept, as an experience. An emotional boundary is the felt sense that what you feel belongs to you. What they feel belongs to them. When this boundary is clear, you can sit next to someone who is stressed without absorbing that stress. You can be around someone who is quiet without assuming something is wrong. You can notice someone's frustration without needing to fix it. But when this boundary is less defined, something subtle happens. Your body treats their emotional state as relevant to your own stability. If they are tense, you feel it. If they are distant, you feel it. If they are unclear, you feel it. And more than feeling it, you respond to it. You try to stabilize it. Not consciously, but automatically. This is where the drain deepens. Because you are not only holding your own internal experience, you are partially holding theirs as well. And the nervous system does not distinguish cleanly between what is yours and what is not when boundaries are blurred. It just knows. Something feels off. Do something about it. There is also an important distinction here between empathy and over-responsibility. Empathy allows you to feel with someone while staying connected to yourself. Over-responsibility makes you feel for someone while losing that connection to yourself. Empathy says, I can see what you're feeling. Over-responsibility says, I need to do something about what you're feeling. And when that shift happens, your role in the interaction changes. You are no longer just present, you are managing. And management creates pressure. Because now there is something at stake. Keeping things smooth. Keeping things calm. Keeping things from becoming uncomfortable. Even if no one has said that out loud. Your nervous system holds that expectation quietly. This connects to another layer that often goes unnoticed: internal permission. When you are in a regulated, safe interaction, you have permission to pause. Disagree. Be quiet. Take time to respond. You don't feel rushed to maintain anything. But when your system is in that subtle alert state, permission narrows. You feel like you should respond quickly. You feel like you should keep things flowing. You feel like you should not let awkwardness grow. And that should is important. Because it means you are no longer just responding, you are performing a role. A role that maintains emotional continuity. And performing, even subtly, is exhausting. Because it requires awareness of how you are coming across. It requires monitoring not just what you feel, but how it might be received. It requires a constant loop. Feel, evaluate, adjust, express. Instead of the simpler loop. Feel, express. And the longer that loop runs, the more energy it consumes. There is one more piece that helps explain why some people trigger this pattern more than others. It has to do with predictability. Your nervous system relaxes when it can predict emotional responses. If someone is consistent, your body learns their patterns. It knows how they respond. It knows how they communicate. It knows where it stands. But when someone is less predictable, even in subtle ways, your body stays engaged. Not because something is wrong, but because it cannot fully map what will happen next. And unpredictability keeps attention active. It says, stay aware. Stay ready. Stay flexible. And while flexibility can be a strength, constant flexibility without rest becomes strain. This is why you might feel more drained around people who are slightly inconsistent, emotionally hard to read, sometimes warm, sometimes distant. Not extreme. Just unclear enough to keep your system from settling. And this brings us to something essential. The exhaustion you feel is not a weakness. It is feedback. It is your nervous system telling you, something here requires more from me than it should. Not necessarily because the other person is doing something wrong, but because the interaction is activating a pattern where you are doing more than just being present. You are regulating. You are adjusting. You are managing. And most of that is happening automatically. So the shift is not about blaming the other person. And it's not about forcing yourself to stop caring. It's about slowly rebuilding a different internal experience of connection. One where you can notice someone's emotional state, without taking responsibility for it. One where you can feel tension, without immediately moving to resolve it. One where you can allow moments to be incomplete, without rushing to stabilize them. This doesn't happen all at once. It begins in very small moments. A pause you don't fill. A reaction you don't immediately adjust. A feeling you allow to exist without reshaping it. And as those moments grow, something new begins to form. A sense that connection does not require constant management. That presence does not require performance. That being with someone does not have to mean carrying both sides of the emotional experience. And from that place, a quieter question begins to emerge. If you didn't have to regulate the emotional space every time, how would your body start to feel in connection with others? If you've been recognizing yourself in this pattern, there is something important to hold on to as you begin to shift it. The goal is not to become someone who feels nothing. The goal is to become someone who doesn't have to carry everything. Because right now, your nervous system has been doing something very specific. It has been trying to make connection safe by staying slightly on. Slightly attentive. Slightly careful. Slightly ready to adjust. And that, slightly, has been enough to drain you. So the shift is not dramatic. It's not about suddenly speaking differently or acting differently. It's about what happens in the small, quiet moments inside you. Those moments where you feel the urge to lean in, adjust, smooth something out. That's where everything begins to change. You might start noticing it more clearly now. That moment when someone pauses, and your body prepares to respond. That moment when someone seems distant, and your attention sharpens. That moment when something feels slightly off, and you feel the pull to fix it. Before, that movement was automatic. Now, there is a small space. And inside that space, something new becomes possible. You can stay with your own experience for a second longer. You can let the moment exist without immediately stepping in. You can notice what you feel, before adjusting to what they might feel. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Not because anything is wrong. But because you are interrupting a pattern that has been running for a long time. Your body might feel a slight tension. A small uncertainty. A question like, should I be doing something right now? And instead of answering that question immediately, you begin to sit with it. Just for a moment. And what you may start to discover is that not every emotional shift requires your response. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every mood needs to be softened. Not every interaction needs to be managed. Some moments can simply exist. And when you allow that, something subtle begins to happen. Your energy stays with you. Instead of constantly moving outward, monitoring, adjusting, stabilizing, it begins to settle inward again. You feel less stretched. Less divided. Less responsible for what is not yours. And this doesn't make you less caring. It makes your care more honest. Because now, when you respond, it's not coming from tension or obligation. It's coming from choice. You listen because you want to. You support because it feels natural. You engage because you're present, not because you're managing something invisible. And over time, you may notice something surprising. The relationships that are able to hold this version of you begin to feel lighter. More mutual. More balanced. Less effortful. Because real connection does not require you to stay slightly tense the entire time. It can hold pauses. It can hold differences. It can hold moments where nothing is being actively managed. And in those spaces, your body starts to learn something new. That you can be present without being responsible. That you can care without carrying. That you can be with someone, without losing yourself in the process. And maybe that's where everything begins to shift. Not in what you say. Not in how you act. But in what you no longer feel obligated to hold. Because the moment you stop carrying what was never yours is often the moment your energy finally begins to return.